While Papa and the men were talking, Rowdy and I took a walk along the track. That was the first time I'd walked a steel rail of a railroad track. It was fun. Now, to be outdone, Rowdy got up on the rail and walked it too. Rowdy did all right with his rail walking, but I didn't do too well. It's not easy to walk a rail if you're holding onto a rope with a hound dog tied onto the end of it. Believe me, it's pretty hard to do. Rowdy and I were a good way down the track when I heard the train whistle in the distance. It was coming from the other direction. We hurried back to the depot. I had never seen a train before, and I was all excited about seeing my first one. The track made a bend about 500 yards from the depot. I glued my eyes to the bend and held my breath. I waited and watched. The rails started clicking and the ground started trembling. With its bell ringing and black smoke rolling, the engine came around the bend. When Rowdy saw the big, black, noisy engine coming toward him, he got scared. He tried to get between my legs, but I wouldn't let him. I was scared too, but I didn't want a hound dog and a rope wound around my legs if I decided to have a runaway. Rowdy must have gotten so scared he didn't know what he was doing. With every hair on his back standing straight up, he growled and showed his teeth. He ran out to the end of the rope and started to bawl at the train. Behind me I heard someone say, "If that boy could turn that old hound loose, I think he'd tie into that train." All the people around me started to laugh. Just before the train got to the depot, it whistled. I all but jumped out of my britches. I had never heard anything like it in my life. That whistle was too much for Rowdy. With his tail between his legs, he came scooting back to me and tried to get between my legs again. "Rowdy," I said in a quavering voice, "if you don't sit down and behave yourself, I'm going to whip you." I didn't mean what I said, but I was so scared I had to say something. Jarring the ground with its big pounding wheels, the engine chugged by us. It pulled past the depot a little way. With steam hissing and brakes squeaking, it stopped. A passenger coach was right in front of us. For several seconds, a silence settled over the people waiting at the depot platform. All I could hear was the hissing breath of the engine. The door of the coach opened, and a black man with a small stool in his hand stepped out. He was wearing a dark green uniform and a round, hard-top cap with a long bill. That was the first black man I'd ever seen, and I couldn't take my eyes off of him. He must have noticed me staring at him. As he set the stool down on the platform, he looked at me and then at Rowdy. With a friendly smile on his face, he said, "Will that hound tree anything?" I swallowed and said, "Yes, sir, he'll tree anything." The smile spread all over the black man's face. His white teeth flashed. He said, "That's the kind of dog to have. When I was a boy, I had an old hound dog just about like him. I still remember that old dog. We had a lot of fun together." I liked the black man. He was so friendly, and I could tell that he liked boys and dogs. Two cowboys were the first ones off the train. They were carrying their saddles over their shoulders. In a loud voice, someone in the crowd said, "Hey, Larry, how did the rodeo go?" Larry laughed and said, "It went all right for me, but old Henry here, he didn't do so good. He got bucked off everything he got on." Henry said, "If you had drawn the buckers I drew, you would have been in the air so much you would have sprouted wings." Everyone around roared with laughter. Then two drummers got off. Each one was carrying two suitcases. No one said a word to them. The next person to get off was a big, stout woman. She had about a dozen kids bunched up behind her. It sounded like every one of them was bawling. The woman was jerking and shoving kids and giving orders. Then I saw Mama and Daisy at the door of the coach. Mama was carrying her suitcase in one hand and Daisy's old crutch in the other. She saw me and smiled. Tears flooded her eyes. Mama didn't waste any time getting off the coach and coming to me. She dropped the suitcase and the crutch, threw her arms around me, and kissed me. She squeezed me so tight I could hardly get my breath. Then Mama turned me loose, and with a low, choking sob, she went right into Papa's arms. I never saw so much hugging and kissing between Mama and Papa. Daisy was the last one to get off the train. She was still standing in the door of the coach and was looking at me. She had her suitcase with her and some bundles. I had never seen such a warm, tender smile on her face. Her blue eyes were as bright as a bluebird flying into the sun. Two big tears were sliding slowly down her cheeks. The tears stopped about halfway down and held there as if by some invisible force. I let my eyes travel from Daisy's face down to that old crippled leg. I sucked in a mouthful of air and stared. I just couldn't believe it. Daisy wasn't crippled anymore. I kept staring from one leg to the other. If I had known which one had been crippled, I never would have been able to guess. There was no difference in either leg. As I stood there looking at Daisy, I knew that I would never regret giving up my pony. It was all worth it. My little sister wasn't a cripple anymore. Daisy must have seen that I was staring at her leg. Very slowly she raised her foot and wiggled it. Never before had my little sister been able to move her foot like that. To let her know that I understood and was happy for her, I smiled and nodded my head. With no limp at all, Daisy came down the steps and over to me. She stopped about 3 feet from me, set her suitcase down, and piled the bundles on top of it. For a second she just stood there looking at me. I could see the tears glistening in her eyes. Then she just kind of jumped and wrapped her arms around me. I didn't know my little sister was so strong. She was hugging me so tight her small arms felt like steel bands around my neck. "J. Barrie," she whispered, "I love you so very much. I won't ever forget what you did for me." Then she kissed me right on the mouth. I felt the blushing heat as it crawled up my neck and spread all over my face. "I love you too," I said in a low voice, "but you didn't have to kiss me like that, not right here in front of all these people." Daisy smiled and said, "I don't care what anyone thinks. You're my brother and I'll kiss you any time I want to." I wanted to argue with Daisy about that, but I didn't think it was a good time to start an argument. Papa came over and hugged Daisy and kissed her. It was the first time in my life I saw tears in his eyes. Just then the deep voice of a hound dog rang out over the depot platform. In his own way, Rowdy was telling the whole wide world that he was a happy hound. The family was together again. All around us, people started laughing. I was feeling so good that I laughed a little too. We were putting the suitcases and bundles in our wagon when Papa looked at Mama and said, "Why did you bring Daisy's old crutch home? She doesn't need it now." "I know," Mama said as she climbed to the wagon seat, "but I don't care. I brought it home anyway. I want it hung on the wall in our home where I can see it every day and be thankful." Papa never said a word as he laid Daisy's crutch in the wagon, but I could tell by the look on his face that he was thankful too.